Welcome to another presentation where we're looking at what the Bible says, set in the context of the 21st century. The theme of this presentation is the resurrection of Jesus. What does the Bible teach about the resurrection of Jesus? Just what happened, and how can we understand it? The Bible in the 21st century, the resurrection of Jesus. Bit of background. It's a Thursday evening. Jesus with his close friends is in a garden area opposite Jerusalem. It's dark. He's arrested and his friends flee. He faces an overnight trial, which in fact was illegal by the law of the time. Very early next morning he was flogged under the Roman authorities, a punishment so severe that it could kill people. He was mocked by the Roman soldiers and humiliated. At 9 o'clock he was executed by torture on a Roman cross. Horrendous form of death. Hanging there in agony, he still sought the forgiveness of those who had done it to him. Quite remarkable. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. With moistened lips, he says one word. Translated in English as "it is finished," but one word in the original language. If you like, I've done it, it's complete. And he dies, and all kinds of cosmic consequences seem to follow that are difficult to explain, and that had an impact on the hardened Roman soldiers who carried out the execution. That's the facts of the death of Jesus. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Jewish Sabbath started at 6 p.m. So he died at 3 o'clock. There were only 3 hours. Very often dead bodies of crucified victims were just left on the cross to be scavenged by animals. But some close friends of Jesus wanted to give him a proper burial. And a man called Joseph seeks permission to carry out the burial. He wasn't a blood relative, so he had to have permission. But he had to rush it. So the burial was in a nearby cave. As a common Jewish practice for those who were wealthier was to be buried in family tombs, which took the form of caves carved into a hillside. And the burial was carried out with due respect, but it was carried out in quite a rush. Time was short. The cave had never been used. No confusion about dead bodies in the cave. Typically these family caves would be for a whole family. The entrance to the cave was covered by a huge stone that would take 2 or 3 men great effort to move. And then Jewish guards were posted around the tomb to make sure it wasn't interfered with. And the tomb was sealed with wax so that any movement of the stone would be detectable. That was the burial. A lot of people saw things. In fact, there were eyewitnesses. If you look at the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus, a lot of people observed these things. They were eyewitnesses of the events. The Roman soldiers, 4 of them, with an officer, carried out the execution. That was traditional practice. The mother of Jesus was there, the agony she must have gone through to see her eldest son tortured to death. There were various women who'd come down from the Galilee area in the north who were there. There was at least one disciple stayed to watch it. The Jewish religious leaders were there gloating, "We've got our man, we've got rid of the troublemaker." And of course a place of crucifixion was a place that is public. The Romans wanted to use crucifixion to terrorize the populations. So there were crowds and passers-by, simply because of the location. The crucifixion of Jesus was observed by large numbers. The burial, 2 men are named. Both were well off, and probably they had servants to do the work. A number of women who were named observed what was happening with deep concern. The Jewish guards were posted at the burial site. Interestingly, no disciples are recorded as having seen it. None of the 12. They'd gone into hiding. They were scared stiff, thinking they'd be next. So looking at it overall, Jesus was executed and he was dead. To check that he was dead, a Roman soldier, using his spear, stabbed Jesus up under the rib cage through the heart, a fatal blow in its own right. The Roman soldiers and the officer who carried out executions, if they didn't do it correctly, they themselves were executed. So they were not going to make a mistake. So they checked that Jesus was dead. They also killed the other 2 who had been crucified there as well. Jesus was buried. Witnessed by several, the tomb was unused. There's no confusion with any other dead bodies. And the tomb was protected by human guards and a seal. But the entrance was covered by a very large stone. That was the traditional practice, to stop animals getting in. And it would take several men to move it. That's simply the evidence. And it comes from numerous sources. That took place on the Friday, so by 6 p.m. he was buried, before the Jewish Sabbath started. On the Sunday morning, there's a picture of the kind of tomb. It was found open. If we look at the account written by Matthew, one of the followers of Jesus, somewhere about dawn, which would be early, 2 ladies, both with the name of Mary, they went to the tomb. They had watched what had been done to the body of Jesus, and all the funeral rites and activities had been carried out in a great rush. It had to be done by 6 o'clock, when all work had to stop. So they wanted to go and complete the things that had been rushed. They didn't know how they were going to get into the tomb, because they couldn't move the stone. But when they got there was a violent earthquake, and the stone was rolled away, and an angel was sitting on the stone. They just fell back in amazement. The guards saw it. They were transfixed, unable to move with fear. What on earth was going on? I think if you and I had been the guards, we'd been in exactly the same position. The angel speaks to the women, tells the women that Jesus has risen. And the women set off to find the disciples. They were fearful. What on earth had happened? But underneath there was a sense of joy. Something good has happened. But they didn't understand it. And again, if we'd been in their position, we would not have understood it. And as they come out of the area where the tomb is, they meet Jesus, risen and alive. And he instructs them to go and inform the disciples. Interestingly, to inform Peter particularly, because Peter had failed Jesus so miserably. There's the words recorded by Matthew, the words of the angel, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he is risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee, way up in the north of the country. There you will see him. Now I've told you." And as they are leaving the area around the tomb, they meet Jesus, and he says to them, "Greetings." They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Just awe and amazement. Then Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." There will be a reunion in the Galilee area. Looking at it overall, from many accounts, the angels recognize, and Jesus recognizes, the fear and uncertainty of these ladies. Quite understandable. They never experienced anything like this in their lives. And they're invited not to be alarmed, and in the original, "you" addressed to them both is plural and emphasized. Don't you be alarmed. The angel could be two angels, because different accounts show a second angel there. Perhaps in Matthew's account the ladies only saw one. They knew the ladies were looking for the body of Jesus to complete the funeral rites. And they point out he was crucified, yes. He was killed, but is now alive. He's risen. And the word there means bodily resurrection, not a spirit floating around in the ether. Risen means bodily resurrection. And they saw Jesus physically. Invited to look at the evidence of the empty tomb. We don't know whether they actually did that or not, whether they just peered in. Pointed out that Jesus predicted it would happen. He had predicted it 3 times it would happen, but his followers never got it. And then the instructions were given. Go and tell the disciples, my friends. But remember to tell Peter he'll be feeling terrible because of his failure. And then plan to go back north again. There'll be a great reunion in the Galilee area. So that's the key messages. Now what we've got to remember is, if we look at the 4 Gospels, they're not just stories of the resurrection of Jesus. What the authors have done is they brought together the evidence to show that Jesus actually, physically, was resurrected. So that's the aim. To present the evidence simply as it was, that Jesus had risen. And Matthew in particularly, who is very systematic in the way he presents things, it's a demonstration of the fact that Jesus has risen. And the ladies and the disciples and others, it blew their minds. They couldn't get it. But eventually they realized it was all true. It's just a small point in passing. Women at that time were the second-class citizens. Jesus had elevated the position of women to equality. But he appears first to women, regarded as unreliable witnesses, second-class citizens, the possessions of men. That was the way of the culture. There's a message there for us today. And it's all part of the transformation of the status of women. Jesus didn't just do it for the status of women who were second-class citizens. Jesus was prepared to mix with and help those who were at the bottom of the social heap, despised by society. Jesus meets everybody and regards everybody as of equal value before God. And there's a deep message in that, just in passing. More evidence. The death was observed by large numbers. We saw that. It was confirmed by a Roman soldier sticking the javelin straight through the heart of Jesus. The tomb was unused. No confusions about other dead bodies. The burial was carried out under the supervision of 2 men, not just one person, almost certainly helped by their servants. It was observed. The tomb was closed. It was sealed. All these things are recorded, and recorded in many places. The tomb was guarded so that nobody could steal the body. And yet when the women entered the tomb, the body was gone, and the stone had been rolled away just about that time. Angels speak of his resurrection, and the women almost certainly didn't get it. Then they met Jesus as they were coming out of the area. They tell the disciples, Peter and John immediately get up and go to see what's happening. They run. John gets there first, almost certainly being younger. But Peter goes in. Not only is the body gone, but the grave clothes are lying exactly as they would be, neatly. And none of his followers expected this. They just didn't get it. And then there are numerous meetings with Jesus recorded, before finally there's a great reunion in the Galilee, in the north. Well documented and supported evidence. Well, people have put up other explanations. The fanciful one of today is that it wasn't Jesus on the cross, someone took his place. That is taught in Islamic circles. We have to say with all honesty there's not one shred of evidence for this. The death of Jesus recorded not only in our Bibles, but in the secular literature of the day. And who's going to be taking the place of Jesus when he was crucified in front of his own mother? The Islamic teaching is that God somehow magically made people not see what was happening. So that makes God the God of deception. A fanciful idea, and contradicts the nature of God. No, Jesus was crucified, and the Roman soldiers, if they'd got it wrong, they would have been executed. They didn't make mistakes. Some have suggested that. That's been looked at medically. Just impossible. If you go over the records historically, nobody ever survives crucifixion. It's the most horrible death out. Literally, the body is torn apart under its own weight. but the Roman soldiers stabbed them straight through the heart. Some say that. Oh, wait a minute. Who was going to steal the body? And there's a simple answer. If someone stole the body, all you've got to do is produce the body, and that is totally undermined. But the disciples were in hiding. They were scared stiff for their life. The tomb was guarded by armed Jewish soldiers. The tomb was sealed. You couldn't open the tomb easily. Take several men to do it, and there would be a great noise. Just a complete impossibility. Would you make up the story if you're scared stiff for your life? Would you found a new religion on a lie? And then be prepared to die for that lie? Because many of the early followers of Jesus did in fact end up being executed because they were followers of Jesus. We don't die for a lie. Simple fact is that. And if we'd been in their shoes, we'd have been exactly the same. Interesting observation. When the women went to the tomb, stone rolled away, tomb empty, guards baffled. The tomb was seen to be empty, and the women report back to the disciples. The guards saw the tomb was empty, and they report back to their bosses in Jerusalem. The women declared Jesus has risen because they'd seen Jesus, and that's what they told the disciples. The guards said, "What's happened? We don't know." It led to a reunion in the Galilee, which was the start of one of the greatest people movements in the history of mankind. The great Roman Empire didn't last forever, but the followers of Jesus did. The empire fell, but the followers of Jesus kept on growing in numbers. They invent a cover-up story, but at the end of the day, all that the Jewish priests and leaders stood for was destroyed when their temple was flattened in AD 70, a few decades later. There's very strong, clear evidence just from these two stories. But the key point is this. Both the women and the guards, they saw the same events. You see, we're not as objective as we think we should be, or we think we are. Famous statement, we do not see things as they are, we see things as we are. And if we live in a world where we have decided that miracles cannot happen, that if there's a God, he's far distant in space and we can quietly forget about him, and we live according to our own agendas, we just dismiss any idea of a resurrection, even when all the evidence is presented to us. These guards saw it, but they weren't prepared to admit it. You see, we've got to look at the evidence, weigh the evidence, and everything in this series is built around evidence. What's the evidence? What's it telling us? Then how do we react? That was done long ago in a famous book entitled Who Moved the Stone? Now, Frank Morison was an atheistic lawyer, and he wanted to demolish Christianity. And he realized the best way was to demolish the resurrection, because if the resurrection hadn't occurred, then Christianity just collapsed. And he was dead right. So he looked at the evidence as a lawyer would look at it in a court. He did a lot of work, a lot of study, did a lot of travel, a lot of documents, sifting the evidence, as a lawyer is trained to do, and to do it objectively. But that was his goal. But when he got all the evidence together and looked at it, he describes it the book that couldn't be written, because he found that the evidence was overwhelming that the resurrection had taken place. And yet he started with the opposite direction. But at least it was an honest, legal, forensic inquiry, looking at the evidence. Now, that book's old. You'll probably get a copy sifting through people who sell second-hand books. But there are modern ones who've done the similar thing, but they've started perhaps from a Christian perspective. So I choose this one because it starts from an anti-Christian perspective. And Frank Morison, in the end, became a committed follower of Jesus. Because when he looked at the evidence was overwhelming, because he looked at it objectively. Looking at the Bible for the moment or two, just a pattern of times. 9 o'clock in the morning on the Friday, Jesus was crucified. There was a strange darkness came over the land between 12 noon and 3 p.m. Nobody has been able to understand what was causing this. We know from other observations it could not have been an eclipse of the sun. But something cosmological was happening in the area. At 3 o'clock, Jesus says one word. It is finished in English, but one word in the original. I've done it. It's completed. He then died. And shortly after, the Roman soldier checked that he was dead with a fatal stabbing. And in that 3-hour period, the burial was completed, as it had to be under Jewish law. On the Saturday, just nothing seemed to happen. The disciples were in hiding. They thought, we'll be next. They got the boss. They got Jesus. They got our master. They'll get us next. They were scared stiff. The Sunday morning earlier, we saw the story of the two Marys going to the tomb. They found the tomb empty. They tell the disciples. And for both them and the disciples, there was confusion and uncertainty, mixed with a bit of joy. Something has happened that's good. And the Marys had seen Jesus. And eventually the disciples would see Jesus too. But they didn't really know what was going on. We don't know how long that stretch lasted for. But Jesus came and appeared to the disciples on numerous occasions in the following days to give them time for them to realize that he was resurrected, that he did eat food, that it was the same Jesus. Yes, physically in his body there were the wound marks of the crucifixion, but he was totally and completely restored. Medically impossible. And a bit later, as he asked them to do, They all gathered in the Galilee, maybe in quite a big number. And Jesus then commissions them. He's going away. He's going back into God's presence in heaven. And he commissions his followers to continue the work before he ascends. Paul writes that, "For Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep," that's those who have died. Now, if Jesus is the first fruits, there must be other fruits. Resurrection is open to all human beings in Jesus. Much later, Paul wrote that he's the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, the same phrase, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. He defeated death, he went through it, and he showed there was life after death. He invites us to follow him. Jesus declared with power to be the Son of God. That means that Jesus carried all the fullness of God in him. All that Jesus claimed to be was confirmed by his resurrection from the dead, because only God could raise someone from the dead. And John in old age writes that we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him. That's at the end of time, for we shall see him as he is. Resurrection is open to all humanity in Jesus. What a wonderful promise and picture. Jesus had raised Lazarus from the death some time before. And he said to both Lazarus' sisters, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die." Believes in me is not an intellectual phrase. It's a word of action, a word of response. The person who responds to me and comes my way, even though we all die, you will go through death to resurrection. Another wonderful picture and promise. The key passage on the resurrection is in 1 Corinthians 15, really the whole chapter. It's worth having a look at the whole thing. Now, this was the earliest record that we've got of the resurrection, perhaps written about 25 years after the event. I've just picked a small part of it. Paul writes, he's writing to this group of followers of Jesus in the Greek town of Corinth, which was the biggest city, a very big city in southern Greece. Followers of Jesus there, and he says, "For what I received I pass on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas," that's the old word for Peter, "then to the 12. After that he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time." That's not any hallucination. Most of them are still living. You can go and talk to them and check it with them. Though some have fallen asleep, they've died. Then he appeared to Jesus, to James, the younger brother of Jesus. Then to all the apostles. And last of all he appeared to me, says Paul, as to one abnormally born. Paul had met Jesus on the Damascus road some years later. The evidence for the resurrection, he was seen by so many. Normally in a court of law, 2 witnesses confirming each other is enough. 500 is very impressive. This is no delusion. This is no hallucination. This is no make-believe. Go and talk to these people, Paul says. They'll confirm it. What are the implications for today? God raised Jesus from total, complete death. He was executed. And that vindicated all that Jesus said. It vindicated all he did. He told the truth. He did it right. It confirmed that what Jesus achieved on the cross is meaningful and true. He took on all the powers of evil, both in the spiritual realm and the human realm, that could be thrown at him at their worst. And he came through and out the far side as a victor. That probably is the significance of the last words he spoke before his death. The one word: it's finished. I've done it. I've achieved it. I've achieved what you asked me to do, God. But by being resurrected, he showed there is life after death. He's given us a model for our encouragement. And in some of the little verses I read a moment or two ago, that is made very clear. And he showed us a little of what resurrection might be like. He was recognizable. He was physical. He could relate to other people. Now, we don't know whether this is the total picture or there's maybe more. But resurrected life will be wonderful. And in doing all this, what it shows is that he holds the key for us in reaching that resurrected life. I am the resurrection and the life, said Jesus. He who believes in me, who responds to me, who comes my way, who commits themselves to me, whatever language we use, I've got the key. I'll open the door for you. Just come my way. Wonderful implications for us today. As we finish, just look at that. We're living between the resurrection and resurrected life in God's new world.